My name is Melissa Subak. I'm one of the speech pathologists here at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. My focus has really been on minimally verbal children with autism spectrum disorder, so whether they are little ones, toddlers, all the way up through adolescents and early adults, working with kids to help them functionally communicate, whether it's verbally or through the use of augmentative alternative communication. So today we're really going to be focusing on the AAC piece. Thank you. All right. So the American Speech Language and Hearing Association considers augmentative alternative communication, or AAC, to include all forms of communication other than verbal speech. So that might be aided language or unaided language. In terms of unaided language, anything that we would use our body to communicate. So facial expressions, sign language, gestures. These are considered forms of AAC, but when we think about AAC, or augmentative alternative communication, we typically think more about the aided types of communication. And when we get referrals for children for AAC evaluations, we're typically focusing on the aided communication. So that would be things like writing, picture exchange communication system, or picture-based communication systems, or voice output systems. So things like iPads or other speech-generating devices. So those would be anything that would be a tool or a piece of equipment other than a person's own body or voice that we would use to communicate. AAC is a useful tool for most, if not all, children with autism spectrum disorder who is unable to use their verbal communication to meet their communication needs across all communication partners or across all contexts and settings. So when we think about a child's communication partners, we're thinking about teachers, parents, caregivers, siblings, friends, therapists, everybody. We want kids to be able to communicate across a variety of different communication partners and in a variety of different settings. So kids might be better at communicating, say, at home with their parents, who might understand their speech a little bit better than an unfamiliar person, or they may use certain tools or supports at school, but maybe not at home or with a therapist. So it's really important when we're thinking about who we should be using AAC for, and whether a child warrants an assistive technology or AAC evaluation. It's important for us to really think about how well they're communicating, not just in one environment, but in all environments and across all the people that they would need to communicate with. So we think about AAC supports for children with more mild to moderate social communication deficits. These might not be things that they would necessarily need to replace verbal communication, but augment or support what they are already able to say verbally. So this would be things like visual schedules. Maybe at home, if they're working on getting dressed, they may benefit from a visual schedule talking about the different steps they would need to complete a task. Or maybe a child is able to communicate their wants and needs verbally, but the social communication aspect of their verbal abilities is difficult. So they may need topic boards to participate in conversation, just some other types of picture-based supports to help with that purpose of communication. Social stories are visual supports for kids who might be entering a novel environment or an environment that might be difficult for them. So picture-based supports in that way can help with behavior and communication, or even just some simple visual supports for social skills. For children with more moderate to severe social communication deficits, kids who may be more minimally verbal or not as fluid in their verbal communication, again, we can use those visual schedules, but then we're also thinking about additional means to get their wants and needs met. So things like picture communication systems or speech generating devices. So when we're thinking about whether a child needs AAC supports or whether we want to pursue an AAC evaluation, thinking about what are the purposes for communication. Is the child able to communicate verbally for a variety of different pragmatic purposes? Maybe not just requesting things that they want or labeling things that they see, but also participating in social interactions verbally. Is the child able to report information, talk about their day, join in social interaction routines with their friends? And if we see that a child is able to maybe make a single word request for something they want, but the social parts of communication are more challenging, we may still need to pursue an AAC evaluation with AAC supports to help with that. And then also, how is a child communicating? So thinking about, are they communicating across a variety of people in a variety of environments, which is what I was talking about a minute ago. Is the child experiencing communication breakdowns? Are there times where a child gets really frustrated and they're not able to verbally communicate how they're feeling? And you're seeing maybe behavioral difficulties as a result. Can the child repair those communication interactions? When the communication breakdown occurs, can he or she use their verbal communication to help themselves kind of repair that breakdown? And then also, if a child is using a communication system already, maybe we're thinking they need the supports, but maybe we need to pursue additional assessment or training for kids who are already using systems, but maybe that system doesn't now fit their communication needs. One example would be if a young child is using picture exchange communication system or PECS, and maybe their communication needs have expanded. So at first, maybe they're having difficulty initiating communication, but now they're able to exchange a picture to request something they want, but we want to target the more social aspects of communication. And text could be somewhat limiting in thinking about meeting all those pragmatic purposes or communication needs. So working on maybe reassessing the child's skills as they improve and see if there are different types of supports that we can give to help expand their vocabulary skills or their repertoire of communication functions. So once we've identified a child who needs AAC supports or would benefit from an AAC evaluation, the first thing we would want to do would be to contact the child's IEP team to discuss an assistive technology evaluation. This is going to be really important because any private intervention services are going to be used as a supplement or support to what the child is already getting at school. So talk to them about what services or supports are already being provided in the school setting. Is the child using visual schedules? Are they already using a device at school that maybe they're not bringing home? Is the teacher pursuing assistive technology assessment? Maybe the plan is already in place to have an AAC person come out and assess the child within the classroom, or maybe they are doing trials of various AAC devices but don't yet know specifically what they're going to be using. The assistive technology process is a little bit different in school compared to what might be done in a private intervention setting or private therapy setting, which I'll talk to you more about a little bit later. But in short, oftentimes in the school setting, there is more of an ongoing assessment of the child's AAC needs within the classroom. They might come over several different sessions over several different months before communicating what specifically is going to be used with the child. So talking to the IEP team can be helpful in gaining information about what is already being done. Discuss the concerns that you have with the child's intervention team. So again, that's going to be school, and if they're getting private intervention, talk to them as well. So in school, if they aren't using AAC already, if you have concerns that your child's speech is not meeting their communication needs, talk to the school about what concerns you have and talk to their private intervention providers about what those concerns are and see how they are being addressed in the therapy setting. And then also consider an AAC evaluation through a private facility. So that we have an AAC team here that can provide augmentative alternative communication evaluations. Those are meant to complement, not replace, what's being done in school. So we really want to collaborate with everybody who is on the child intervention team to make sure that AAC supports are consistent across all environments so that a child is able to access communication throughout their day. So thinking about the preparation piece for an AAC evaluation, as a parent, it's helpful to identify the current communication modes. So if your child is using gestures, are they able to use more symbolic, socially directed gestures? Things like pointing, waving, shaking and nodding their head, showing objects, giving objects to you, using kind of more of those socially directed gestures versus body movements or physical means of communicating. Oftentimes for kids with autism who have more significant social communication needs or younger children, the first go-to is, I want something, I'm going to reach and grab it. Or I'm going to kind of help you physically go to the item that I want, maybe by placing your hand on it or taking your hand and leading you to something. So those are those more kind of the body movements or physical means of getting a kid's wants and needs met that are really dependent on the communication partner. So when we're thinking about gestures, we want to think about not just the symbolic gestures or the socially directed gestures, but also what other types of physical means is a child using to get their wants. And that can give us some information that can be helpful in determining where a child is in terms of their communication skills and what we can do to help. We're also thinking about eye contact. So is the child able to look at an object that he or she wants, or even share their attention between that object and a person? Maybe I want something, I want that cup, but I can't figure out how to get it to go to work. So I look from the cup to Melinda, then back to the cup and try to get her attention to get that help. So, we're looking at a child's ability to look at an object that he or she wants, but also their ability to try to pull you in to get assistance when needed with eye gaze. And then if your child is using AAC support and you're wanting to either gain access to those supports at home or reassess whether the AAC systems are appropriate, we want to know specifically what the child is using. So again, talking to their intervention providers about what they are using. So picture exchange communication system is a big one to get kids started. Are they using topic boards? Are they using a speech generating device? And if they are using speech generating devices, what device are they using? So oftentimes we know that they're using something or they're trying something at school or in therapy, but we might not know specifically what the name of that device is. And there are so many devices out there and so many communication apps on tablets like an iPad that just knowing that they're using a device might not really lead us to what specifically they're using. So knowing the name of the device would be also helpful to determine. And then also vocalization. So sounds, words, phrases. Maybe a child does have some speech that they're able to use for communication. We also want to know, are those vocalizations related to the context? So is the child able to functionally communicate that they want something verbally, Or are they able to verbalize, but maybe in an undirected way? We want to know that as well. And one of the things I did not include in the handout that I thought about after the fact, which I shouldn't have, but speech intelligibility is also a really important thing to think about. So kids who have speech may be more intelligible to familiar communication partners, but less familiar communication partners may not be able to understand. So maybe they've developed some word approximations that mom or dad or sister or brother or teacher might understand, but if they need help in the community, at the library, at the grocery store, with a friend, or with a new therapist, they may not know what the child is trying to say, and that would be really frustrating. So even if a child does have some speech that their highly familiar communication partners may understand, less familiar communication partners, if they're having difficulty with the speech intelligibility, we may still need to consider AAC supports to help the child functionally and successfully communicate across all environments. So that can be really helpful. I know sometimes when we have families come in, their kids are typically able to communicate more successfully at home than in any other environment. And we can use that to help implement some of these strategies, but if the school is also having difficulty understanding a child, these supports may be really helpful in improving academic participation. So just some more prep for an assistive technology evaluation. It is really important to gain access to any previous speech and language evaluations. You put in the work, the kid has put in the work to do those evaluations, and if we have that information, it can be really helpful because we won't have to repeat the testing if it's been done within the last 6 months. Most insurance companies now are requiring that a child has a formal speech and language assessment within 6 months of an assistive technology evaluation if we're asking the insurance company to pay for it. So in preparing for the evaluation, if the school has recently done testing or you've recently pursued testing through a private place, a private clinic, getting those test results or the report will be really helpful to be able to provide the person who's evaluating your child for an AAC system so that we don't have to repeat testing. Now, if it's needed, we can, but it can be helpful to already have that information handy so we can really just focus on what the child needs in terms of AAC in that session. It provides really good background information. Preparing a list of objects, activities, familiar people, things that your child really wants to communicate about would be really helpful to be able to provide during an AAC evaluation. These evaluations are usually conducted in an unfamiliar environment with an unfamiliar person. So as much familiarity we can provide to a child in the novel setting is what we would want to be able to do. So having those toys or activities or being able to tell the therapist what your child really likes and what motivates them can help us give access to those objects or activities during the evaluation to get a good picture about how your child can communicate when they're really motivated to do that. And then consider bringing those motivating toys, books, snacks, anything that your child will want to communicate about during the assessment to the evaluation so that we can tempt your child to get some good information. If they don't want to communicate, the evaluation gets tough because regardless of what system we use, if they're not motivated, they're not going to want to use it. And another big one is limiting the child's screen time. With any type of system, an iPad-based communication system, if a child is spending a lot of time playing on a device like a tablet or an iPad or a phone, a laptop, a computer, those types of activities, those toys, those apps, YouTube, they're a lot more fun than an app for communication. So one of the core difficulties in autism spectrum disorder is social communication. And whether that child is communicating verbally or through the use of AAC, it's still a challenge. So we're competing against something that is much more fun. YouTube is way more interesting than that picture of a balloon. Um, so, limiting the screen time can really help when we have to transition to use those systems for social communication purposes. So in terms of what to expect from an evaluation, during an evaluation, the speech language pathologist will talk to you about your child's communication abilities and needs. So gaining information about how they're communicating, what they're communicating for, what types of communication, what modalities they're using, speech gestures, AAC supports, speech intelligibility, what they're using at home versus at school versus in therapy. What are those abilities like? So having those previous evaluations are helpful, and then also talking to you because you see them in their most natural environment, so they may be better able to communicate with you than what is captured on a speech and language assessment. So we talked about that. As I had mentioned before, we will conduct a standardized test of communication. We typically look at receptive and expressive language on a standardized assessment if one has not been done within the last 6 months while we have kids here, because if we do end up applying for funding through a child's insurance, we are going to need that standardized assessment or structured assessment of speech and language skills within 6 months. And then we'll identify a child's motivators, which I said earlier, preparing for that evaluation, having those motivators handy, or at least knowing what those motivators are so that we can provide them during the assessment. And then the SLP will initiate some fun and engaging activities with those motivating items or activities to assess the child's ability to use a variety of tools and supports that we have programmed to have the vocabulary needed to engage in these areas. So another big thing that we think about in AAC evaluations and in treatment for children who use AAC or may need it is the type of communicator the child is. So there's different levels of communication competency or success that we think about for AAC users, and that can help guide us in the direction of the types of AAC supports the child may benefit from. There's actually on some tools there are 5 levels. I'm just going to focus on 3 right now, but I can talk to you about kind of those transition levels when I talk about what types of devices a child may need. So we have emerging communicators. Those are kids who may have unintentional communication or might not really be able to functionally communicate using verbal or nonverbal means yet. Or they might have non-symbolic communication, meaning they might reach for something that they want, look at something, but really don't have a way of using a specific word or a specific gesture, maybe even a sign to represent something that they might want to get. Or they might be able to even communicate some basic wants and needs, but that ability is really limited. They're really just emerging in their ability to functionally communicate by giving objects or pointing at anything. And then we look at our intentional but context-dependent communicators. And they have some reliable symbolic communication, meaning they might be able to exchange pictures for things that they want, or children may have some limited verbal communication, some vocabulary, or maybe they're able to use pictures to communicate, but that communication is still limited. They may just communicate for one or a few pragmatic functions. So again, those are things like communicating for things that you want, labeling things that you might want to talk about, asking for help, protesting when you don't want something. So kids who are intentional communicators, but context dependent, really rely on highly familiar communication partners, highly familiar environments, and vocabulary still is somewhat limited. And then by the time kids are independent communicators, they're able to generate novel utterances, and that might be verbal or through the use of AAC. They're able to communicate about a variety of different topics across a variety of different environments and communication partners. And I said several pragmatic functions, but really we're looking at most functions of communication. Things like conversation and joint engagement, initiating social interaction, getting their wants and needs met effectively. And that is, independent communicators can be using AAC, but they've really mastered the ability to use their systems. Or for kids who don't have AAC, they're able to do all of these things independently using verbal communication. And identifying where a child is in terms of their competence for communication is really important when we think about what types of AAC would be beneficial or what types that they may respond well to. So our emerging communicators, just to give you some more information, as I had mentioned, they're using they have more limited understanding of symbols. They're using, again, facial expression, some of those body movements that we talked about earlier, pulling a caregiver or familiar communication partner to things that they want. And one of the things I didn't talk about was you do need substantial assistance from caregivers or other communication partners to successfully communicate, because we're doing a lot of interpreting for these emerging communicators. And it might be difficult to determine how much the child understands. Maybe they follow directions sometimes, but not other times. Or they might rely on visual support. So if you're asking a child to go get their shoes, you might have to point, and we're not really sure whether the child is responding to that visual or if they're really understanding the direction that you're giving. So it's really difficult to determine how much the child understands based on that responsiveness if they're an emerging communicator. The intentional communicators, as I have mentioned, understand picture symbols or photographs for highly familiar things that they're seeing pretty frequently in the environment. They can follow some simple instructions. So their understanding of language is a little bit better developed than emerging communicators. And I had mentioned these things before, but they're starting to also initiate interaction with familiar adults and peers for social purposes. But still, those most successful communication opportunities occur within familiar environments or activities with familiar people. And they may still benefit from support to help. And then we have our independent communicators that understand in a language or a level that's commensurate or age appropriate for chronological age. We wouldn't expect a receptive language disorder to be present. It may have been in the past, but now receptive language or understanding of language is appropriate. Kids are able to combine word phrases or written text across a variety of topics and environments. Able to engage in conversation, and as I had mentioned, if they're using a speech generating device, they're able to prepare content. So maybe program a story of something that happened yesterday into their device to share with school the next day or share with a friend. They're able to program narratives and use features like word prediction. So maybe not relying so much on those pictures in their device, but also starting to type out some words if they have adequate literacy skills. So as a guide, now this isn't inclusive by any means, but this is kind of help with some of our more highly used or highly available systems that we use here at CARD. This is, as I said, by no means an inclusive list, but just to kind of get us started. Thinking about those emerging communicators, seeing that they're most successful using picture-based communication, such as text, and that would be something like this. So pictures of highly familiar things that kids can access in a picture communication book. If they're not yet able to discriminate between pictures, supports like this can be helpful. This is just a single button speech generating device. So you hit the button, and you can't hear me because I talked slow when I was programming this, but you hit the button and it says whatever the picture is, but you could also just not even have the picture if they're not responding to that, or change out the picture based on what you need. But basically, a child just needs to learn, I hit the button when I want something. And over time, we can help with that picture discrimination piece, but this might be a good place to start to build intentional communication, which would be that next category. And then also some simple gestures, body language, facial expressions. We always support those kind of unaided tools to help supplement what we are doing with aided language, or AAC, the aided AAC support. For intentional communicators, static display systems. Now, static display devices are devices that have all the vocabulary needed for a particular activity available on a single screen. And we can have multiple screens, but the screen doesn't change. So something like the GoTalk, which is what this is. This is the GoTalk 20. You see that words like drink, blow, and eat are on the same page as pretzel and chips. So basically, if you're doing a snack activity with a child, everything that they would need to see is available to them on a single screen. And the screen doesn't change as they press the icons. And then a text speak is another similar system. It's a static display device that is similar to the GoTalk. It's just from a different company. But the features are pretty similar. Some other speech generating communication apps that are more of those static display types of systems. The GoTalk Now is an app for the iPad that is similar to the GoTalk, but it's just based on an app. The benefits of some of these static or more simple communication apps are that you can program on the fly. So say you want to go to the park and your kiddo needs his AAC device, which they will if they need AAC support, and you want to bring your GoTalk 20, you have to make sure that before you get there that everything's programmed in, that you're on the computer making the board, making sure that the vocabulary is already there. For something like the iPad-based GoTalk, or some of the visual scene display apps like Scene Speak, which shows a picture versus a bunch of different symbols, you can kind of program that on the fly. So once you get to the park, if there are things you really wants to communicate about, you can quickly program that in on an iPad. That doesn't require going to a computer, printing something out, and having it. But those are those kind of earlier apps, or more simple apps that kids can use. Picture-based communication systems that don't have speech output, things like the Flip and Talk, which is this system. This has a greater vocabulary array than picture exchange communication system, in that it has a lot more space, real estate for pictures, so you can have a lot more words on there. And you can also work on different functions of communication as well, commenting, engaging in simple conversations, things like that on this system. But this doesn't have the voice output component, and topic boards as well. Now, as I mentioned, there's in some, in some bodies of literature, there are more than just these three categories. There's a few other kind of in between the three main categories. But as we get kind of out of the intentional context-dependent communicator into independent communicator, there are some other options that are a little bit more complex than the items that I talked about, or the assets and devices I talked about above. So dynamic display systems are a little bit more complex than those static display devices. in that if you touch a word or a button on the device, the screen changes. And I can show you what that looks like. So this is an example. I think I either have lamp or touchdown. So this is lamp words for life, which that's on one. This is one of the communication apps. So for example, the difference for this one is if a child says eat, they can see they eat pretzels without changing the page. For this kid, or for this device, if you say eat, the screen changes, and then you have to go back in and say, so you're navigating through different pages, and that requires increased attention, the increased ability to process a greater number of picture communication symbols, and really to kind of sustain that motivation for communication beyond what's available, what you can see on a single page. So these are communication apps that you can get on an iPad. Most of the apps for communication are available in the App Store, the Apple App Store. There are some systems that are also available on tablets, like the Samsung Galaxy tablet, but I would say there's a lot more available on Apple-based tablets as compared to Samsung tablets or another brand of tablet. And then there's dynamic display speech generating devices. The one that we have downstairs is dead right now, so I didn't bring it up, but those are essentially very similar to what I'm showing you here, in that the screen changes, but those devices are considered dedicated in that you can't click out of the communication app and get to, say, YouTube or email or things like that. They're just used for communication. And then as we get to independent communicators, we're looking at more of those things that fluent verbal communicators are using, that we all might use in everyday life, things like keyboards, or things that kids might need, like text-to-speech apps on a phone, or even if a child has good literacy skills, having a letter board where they can type, generate a message. And then also some of those higher text systems that allow the opportunity for predictive text. Most of the dynamic display systems allow for typing out messages in addition to single icons or icon-ed words. So as you're kind of getting from those context-dependent communication skills to more independent communication, you can usually use those same systems to help get to communication mastery. So now we'll talk about funding the device. So after the AAC evaluation, or the trials that are done through school, we are thinking about how to get the device. Devices have a huge range of prices. So whether we want to pay out of pocket, we typically will recommend that a person pay out of pocket for less expensive systems. You can get a pack of these for $16 right on Amazon, for the whole pack. You can get this Go Talk for, the price just increased to $249, $249 or $299. And then if you already have an iPad, these apps typically range from about $79.99 for the Go Talk to $300 or $299 for the more complex speech apps, or dynamic display apps. So, for those options that are a little bit more cost effective, we may recommend paying out of pocket, or if the insurance company is not covering, we typically try to find a more cost effective way of getting the communication system. We can also apply for grant funding. So there's various grants and ways to get resources, AAC resources, through grants throughout Maryland and in other states as well. So you could apply for a grant for that. You can request an assistive technology evaluation through school. If the school determines that a child is appropriate for a specific system, they will provide that system at school. And then oftentimes, if the parent comes in and does parent training and shows the interest in implementing the AAC system at home, they can oftentimes get access to that same system at home as well. And then insurance funding, which is what we do pretty regularly for kids who are using those. Yes.
A question about school. So if parents through school, what happens over the summertime?
It really depends. You have to have the conversation with the school. Ideally, if that device is coming home and the child is in extended school year services, they have access to it. It can get a little tricky for kids who are not going to ESY, but I would say more often than not, if that parent training program is done, kids are able to have the system. In my experience, it sometimes does we have to have that conversation. I don't think that it always automatically happens that the device is coming home and is staying home. But often with that collaboration between school and parents and private therapists, I think if there's kind of an interest in using the system across all environments, we can usually work something out. So whatever they're using at school, they're able to use at home as well. Yeah, so if you're transition age, you would need to get the system through insurance. Yeah. So that would be another reason to come in for an AAC evaluation. We have a lot of kids who are 18 to 21. They've been using systems for many years. It is part of them. And I think, part of transitioning out of the public school system is determining what those supports are going to look like long term, but we are also able to provide those supports. Some schools are able to apply for funding through insurances like medical assistance, but not all. So we are a resource for adolescents and early adults who need those. But through insurance, we can apply for devices as well. And I'm going to talk to you about what's required for that in a second. And there's also this really great program through Maryland. It's called the Maryland Technology Assistance Program, or MDTAP, which has a library of AAC systems that you're welcome to go and try. You can either rent them or loan them for a period of time at home. And if you're interested in doing a tour of MDTAP, you can actually schedule a tour where you go with a person and they show you the different systems and explain everything and the different opportunities that you have for renting the system. And you're also able to rent systems through insurance as well. So there's purchases and there's rentals as well. If we are going through insurance, there are tons of parent forms that the primary care provider has to fill out, forms that the speech pathologist who conducted the evaluation has to fill out, and this is all done in addition to the SLP evaluation report. So the process definitely does not stop just the day of the evaluation or after the evaluation report goes out. This isn't typically a billable service, so it's something that the SLP is doing outside of their kind of normal duties. So we do have, oftentimes we give a packet to the family and ask that they do get the forms from the primary care provider and the parent forms back to us before we can kind of move forward with funding, because every single component of the funding documents has to be completed and submitted all together. So we can't move forward without all of those forms. So now that we've gotten the device, we've identified what's appropriate, I want to talk a little bit about how to get started at home. So the new device gets delivered to a speech pathologist or whoever it was box ready to go. So we have to do some programming and customization. And then we have kids come in for some initial training sessions. We teach parents how to use the device, how to program it, how to troubleshoot. And a lot of the insurance-based devices that get funded also come with tech support from the company that provided or made the device as well. And then we'll follow up and provide additional resources based on interest level, ability to come to appointments. And then we might refer for other treatment programs, either within CARD if we're local to a family, or ongoing treatment close to home. So again, we're wanting to, whatever we're doing in therapy, we obviously want to be doing at home as well. So identifying motivating activities, working with a child's SLP on learning how to program the device. As I can mention, that typically happens at the device drop-off session. And we want to make sure that parents are comfortable adding words that, as I had mentioned when I talked about going to the park, that you can actually go to the park and use the system and add words. We want to make sure that everybody's comfortable doing that to meet the child's communication needs. We want to make sure that the words are available on the AAC system. And really what we need to do when we're getting started with AAC, either in home or in therapy, is to model language while we're talking. So there is a therapy approach called natural aided language, which I'll talk about in a little bit, where as we're communicating with a child, we are also modeling the language on the device, not requiring a child to necessarily activate the icons on their own at first, but providing that input so that, or that modeling, so that a child learns to understand where items are located, what purposes they could use the device for, and really kind of over time take ownership of the system. It starts with the communication partners first until kids are comfortable activating the device on their own. And it's really also important to accept all attempts the child makes to use his or her communication system, even if they make a mistake. So they're also often going to make mistakes, just like we do when we're learning how to do something new. So repeating a word or a phrase a child activates on his or her system, if correct. So a child might push pretzel, and then obviously we're going to say, yeah, pretzel, before we give them the pretzel, to just really validate that the icon they pushed was the correct one. Model appropriate language, or model language that's related to an activity we're participating in if the child's attempt was not related. So say, we're having snack, we're having pretzel, and the child says train. Well, if we know the child maybe doesn't want the train, doesn't really, it's not available or whatever, we might say something like, oh, we don't have the train, but we're talking about pretzels, and model the correct icon if it's not related. And then expanding language by adding words or utterances. So maybe a child wants to ask for pretzel, so they say pretzel, and we say, yep, pretzel. I want pretzel, or eat pretzel. Just expand on what they said and show them how to use more language the next time. So we're going to be encouraging kids to use their devices. Oftentimes making simple changes to the environment can help tempt a child to communicate. So in snack, instead of giving the child an entire bag of potato chips, maybe we just give a few at a time. We model chips, give a few chips, and then wait for the child to initiate communication on their device, rather than giving the whole bag of chips. Because if they say chips once and they get the whole bag, that's only one opportunity we have to model language or to get communication. But if we give just a few at a time, that really encourages kids to communicate more, have more practice using their system. Toys that require help from someone else. So something like a top that has two parts. Maybe we activate the top, we let the top spin, and then once the top starts, if we're the ones holding this piece, it can't work unless a child communicates with us. So after that top stops, the child will have to say stop or go to make that interaction continue. Daily living activities are other opportunities to help us model language for different purposes. So, for example, a dressing activity where your child helps you get all of his or her clothing ready for the day. So as you are getting the various articles of clothing, you're modeling on the device where those words are. You know, it's time to get our shirt. You open up the drawer and push shirt on the device. Now it's time to get our pants. You pull out the drawer and model pants. What's next? And encourage your child to use more language in those activities of daily living. And those are really great activities to kind of help work on more functions like commenting. And they can also be used to help increase independence in daily living activities. If a child has the language to be able to communicate in an activity of daily living, they're likely to be able to better complete that activity. So for example, if a child who is learning how to bathe themselves independently is able to communicate when the soap runs out or there's no washcloth or no towel, you know, they're able to ask for the things that they need to communicate or to complete that activity. Sure.
So you use it also to work on like choice making? Like do you want the blue shirt or the green shirt? You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
okay.
Yep. Giving choices. You know, as kids get older, they're going to have preferences. Maybe they don't want those scratchy pants. You know, we don't know that unless they're communicating that with us somehow. So teaching the language in those activities is going to be really helpful.
For teaching like how like and don't like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not actually on this board, but most of our boards have. Oh, this one does. Yeah, so you know, I like goldfish. I don't like chips. And that's food. Or maybe I don't like shorts. Kids don't like to wear shorts. Like having that language on the system and modeling that in an activity can be really helpful for increasing independence. Book activities as well. So asking questions about what you're seeing on the pages or encouraging kids to talk about the things they see on different books can be really helpful in encouraging. Modeling words and short phrases on the system throughout the day. I was talking about that needed naturally as a language. You're using the device the way that you want your child to be using it in the long run. So using the device to talk about the things that you're doing throughout the day. That was fun. For using it during many different types of activities and working on generalization. So maybe your child is working on playing toy with a game, and they say my turn, your turn. But turn can also be used to turn up the volume on the TV or turn down the volume on the TV. So thinking about those different words that you're using throughout the day and how they can pertain to or relate to different types of activities can be really helpful in working on generalization. Reporting all attempts your child makes to use his or her communication system. I said in the beginning, especially, kids make mistakes and it's okay. It's a way of figuring out how to use their system. But modeling correct icons as you're rewarding a child for their attempt to communicate is going to be really important. They can see the value of using the system even if they've made a mistake. And challenging your child after prompting a few times, waiting them out and seeing if they can initiate before giving the reward can be helpful. There's different types of prompting. Modeling is when you are touching the different icons to show kids where they are. Physical prompts would be if you're taking their hand and helping them physically activate the icons on their own. Gestures would be things like pointing to where something is. Did you want to say you needed help? Waiting kids out, waiting for them to initiate can be really important. And some kids just need an extra few seconds to figure out what they want to say, just as we do. So waiting a little bit can help too. And then expanding on what they said. So that example of pretzels, we say eat pretzels or I want pretzels can help encourage kids to use more language. I'm not sure what that says. There we go. So making sure you're responding to all attempts a child makes at communicating, whether you think it's purposeful or not, responding is going to be really important to help shape the communication. they might still communicate in the way that they've communicated for years before they've gotten a system, and that's okay too. So they might just go and grab that item themselves because that's what they're used to doing, vocalizing or looking from that object to you instead of using their system at first, because a 5-year-old child has communicated in that way for many years before they've gotten a system. So they're still probably going to go back to what's familiar to them. And then shaping their attempts by responding positively. So modeling language, modeling correct icons, or even providing a natural consequence. So the child wants bubbles but asks for a car, we're going to give them a car instead of the bubbles, even if we have the bubbles in front of us and we know what they're asking, so that they can make that association between the icon, even if it was a mistake. And then modeling, obviously, the correct icon before giving them what they asked, what they meant to ask for. Children need a ton of practice to start using AAC independently. If we think about verbal communication, children are exposed to verbal communication for a full year often before they ever start to say their first words. So with AAC, we can't expect that a child is going to get that system and know how to use it immediately. They're going to have to hear us. They're going to have to see that modeling and learn just as we would with verbal communication. It's not something that will naturally happen independently right away. So they do need a lot of practice before they start using it independently. So here are just some resources. MDTAP was the program that I was talking about earlier that has the lending library, I think they call it. Our AAC program, if you think a child would benefit from an AAC evaluation. And then practicalaac.org is another really good resource for tips and tricks for getting started with AAC. Does anyone have questions?